Guys, why is Deathslinger here? This video isn't about Deathslinger. What are you doing? No, don't show more Deathslinger. Over the years, we have seen 34 killers added to Dead by Daylight, not counting the original 3. Some were extremely strong, while others were weak. Well, what about the ones who've been at the top and the bottom? Today I want to discuss something that recently kicked off in the DBD community, and that is the Hag. Our second original character, after the nurse, was the Hag. She released right after the Shape, which, if you really think about it, it's kind of weird how the nurse came out, who's the best killer in the game, and was immediately followed by the Shape, who's arguably the worst. The Hag brought along the much beloved Hex Totems, as well as the most fuckable man alive, Ace Visconti. Quite frankly, since her release, the Hag has been everywhere on the tier list. She started at the very bottom and had her time near the tippy top. Well, the question now is, after all her changes, where does the Hag lie today? Please join me as I delve into her history as a top tier killer and compare what she is today to that, and we find out just exactly how good the Hag is. This is being brought up because recently in the Dead by Daylight community, I've noticed a lot more people talking about this. Some people claim that she has been power crept down the tier list, and the introduction of not needing a flashlight to wipe away her traps is the finishing nail in the coffin. So before putting out my own opinion on the matter, I had to have the misfortune of playing the Hag myself. A bit of a history lesson. Before patch 6.7.0, the Hag was able to have her traps burnt out by a survivor's flashlight. Once this patch went live, this was no longer the case. However, survivors can now wipe traps out by crouching up to them and interacting with them for a few seconds to completely remove the trap. This has made the Hag have some easier and more understandable counterplay, which is a good thing. However, it also brought down the strength of her undeniably. So before the introduction of the ability to take out the traps without a flashlight, the Hag was considered a very high A tier killer, or at the very bottom of the S tier. Hag was a killer that had to be respected by survivors. She was, and still is, one of the very best 3-gen killers in the game, but we'll talk about that some more later. So did patch 6.7.0 start the downfall of this killer, or was it something before that? Well, you could argue either way, but first I want to briefly talk about the perk, Boon Circle of Healing. When this perk was released, it was a huge nerf to M1 killers due to survivors having a set area that they can run to in order to reset after a hit. However, this perk hit the Hag especially hard due to her Web of Traps playstyle. For the uninitiated, the Hag is best played by setting up what is called the Hag Web in a small area of the map, where she can protect some generators and potentially some hooks. The Hag gets better the smaller the map is. However, if survivors set up a boon in an area where they know her traps are not located, the survivors are able to very safely reset after the Hag hits them. This, in my opinion, is where it all started for the downfall of Hag. Nerfs to perks like Corrupt Intervention and Sloppy Butcher also were huge hits to her strength. So at this point in time, you could argue that the Hag was still a very strong killer, somewhere in the mid to high tier. However, as we mentioned earlier in the video, patch 6.7.0 released. We saw a nerf to survivor healing speeds and a rework to how the Hag's traps were removed. Survivors no longer required a flashlight to remove the traps. They could do so now with no item, simply walking up to the trap and wiping it away. This was a change that was well received by the community due to the general dislike most people have of the Hag. This was the last major update to the Hag. She has been in this state since the changes, so now the question that I brought up at the beginning of the video, is the Hag a weak killer? Well, quite frankly, she's a strange case. You could argue both yes or no, but in order to keep this video from being super long, allow me to briefly give an answer as to both before I reach the final verdict. In one way, no, the Hag is not weak. Dead by Daylight has so many different killers, each with a playstyle that fits them. Legion and Wraith excel at hit and run, Deathslinger and Spirit excel at fast chases, Freddy and Myers excel at losing with 3 hook stages, but the Hag falls in what I would call the least popular of every playstyle, area control. Killers like the Trapper, the Knight, the Singularity, the Skull Merchant, and yes, the Hag, are ones that come to mind when I think about this playstyle. Now, Hag is absolutely one of the stronger area control killers, meaning she is very good at maintaining a small area of the map and preventing survivors from doing the generators in that area. She can protect hooks extremely well, and is extremely dangerous in a basement unhook situation, almost guaranteeing a trade. In this scenario, Hag is strong. She could easily 3-gen a team, if that is her plan going into the match. Pair this with a few early game hooks, and you should be able to out-pressure the survivors by the time you start to snowball in the mid to end game. In the 3-gen playstyle, Hag is excellent. Her teleportation range gives her ample opportunity to prevent her plan from being disrupted. However, this plan isn't the strongest anymore. With nerfs to Call of Brine, Overcharge, and Eruption, as well as the introduction of the 8-kick limit, we've seen this playstyle fall almost into obscurity unless the killer plays it incredibly well. Playing Hag like this is your best chance of success. but I would argue takes a bit more game sense and macro knowledge in order to beat the strongest survivor teams, and I'm not sure most people want to have to learn all that just to play Hag. On the other hand, is the Hag a weak killer? Well, if Hag is only good at 3-genning survivors, then surely that makes her a bad killer. Personally, I agree, and all you need to back this up is a look back at the original version of the Skull Merchant. Yes, everybody's favorite chess grandmaster. She was a terrible killer if you didn't just put your drones next to 3 gens. There was a playstyle called Chase Merchant, and it was mocked because it was just so pointless. For those of you who don't know, Chess Merchant refers to the common playstyle for Skull Merchant before her rework, where you would drop your drones next to 3 generators and 3 gen for 2 hours until the server crashed. Dead by Daylight's always been very fun. Honestly though, comparing this to Hag is maybe unfair, because Hag has more traps than Scully does drones. But if the Hag has set up her web and the survivor runs out of it, you either leave the chase, or you're a 4.4 movement speed killer chasing a survivor with no power. Hag suffers from this quite a bit, leaving her only viable option to be holding an area, or spreading her traps out around the map with no connection between them, basically having no web, just a trap. That's all it revolves around, unfortunately, the willingness to play the game like that. If a killer is willing to sit in a match for 20 plus minutes, chasing survivors off gens, then yes, the Hag is a strong killer. If the killer just wants to play Dead by Daylight and loop the survivors, then no, the Hag is pretty bad. However, there is one scenario that I haven't quite covered. What about the pub stomping element of Hag? Pub stomping refers to going into a public match and completely destroying it due to the other side of the lobby not quite being at the same skill level as the player. Hag is very good at this. Survivors who just run around the map without a care in the world will be demolished by her. Because, unlike most killers, you cannot just run from gen to gen or run straight to the hook. You have to be a bit more careful with your pathing. Think of it like this. She's a knowledge check for the survivors team. Weaker players suffer against her, while stronger players have no real issue. That's why you'll see newer players calling for nerfs to the killer, while old school players say she needs a buff, or at the least, consider her in a fine spot. So now that we're here, what is my final verdict on the Hag? Personally speaking, I consider her a lower mid-tier killer. Now don't get your pitchforks out, Hag mains, because first of all, my opinion doesn't really change anything. I'm just a person with a microphone. But secondly, and most importantly, it is okay for a killer to not be top tier. You can like a bad killer. My favorite killer is a bottom 5 at best. Hag has suffered majorly from power creep over time. New killers come out with new better mechanics. Killers like the Doctor, the Plague, the Knight, the Skull Merchant, the Singularity, and the Xenomorph are all killers that were released after Hag and have somewhat similar gen defending strengths, however also have some sort of anti-loop ability in order to keep them active in chase. Hag's current kit is unfortunately a victim of the time it came out, leaving her in the dust in comparison to the new killers that were released after her. So yes, this leaves Hag at the lower half of the tier list, and I am personally shocked to see that this isn't a community-wide opinion. I genuinely think that most people just don't want to change their opinion on her, or that they lose to her often, so the issue must be that the killer is overtuned. However, this is a debate that I am not interested in being the final opinion in. I'm just a DBD YouTube dweeb, trying to start discussions and entertain. Well, with all this being said, this is the end of the video. My name is Kuhssir. Please like the video if you enjoyed it, leave a subscribe if you're interested in my content, and I hope you have enjoyed. Hopefully, I will see you next time.